So welcome everyone. My name is Kendra and I'm the Alumni Engagement and Development Lead here at ISKL. And for our latest installment in our Get Real series, we have YuXuan Seah, class of 2022. He's going to share his journey as he's transitioned from ISKL to pursuing a degree in computer engineering at the University of Toronto. Originally from Malaysia, YuXuan spent his entire childhood there before graduating from ISKL in 2022. During the winding down of COVID restrictions, is when he graduated. So I'm sure he has some interesting insights on that transition. His time at ISKL prepared him for the challenges of university life, particularly in fostering independence and self-reliance, skills that he now relies on daily in his studies. Now he's based in Toronto. YuXuan reflects on how his ISKL experience shaped his ability to balance academics and extracurricular activities. He credits selecting and balancing these commitments as a key preparation for managing his university workload. YuXuan is excited to connect with students today and shares insights into how the skills and habits developed at ISKL transfer into university life. And he looks forward to inspiring our students to make the most of their time at ISKL while they prepare for their futures. So welcome, YuXuan. We're so happy to have you here today and super appreciative of your time.
All right, hi. So as introduced, my name is YuXuan, and the title of this slideshow is called "When Things Don't Go According to Plan." Since there's a pretty good reason why I title it in this following way, actually. As we go to the next slide, there are some pretty crucial, important things to make note of me because I received from a brief summary is that currently I'm in my third year of university. Did not quite get into my intended program when I first applied to university, but and that probably makes me one of the more interesting person to talk about since gone through the mildly questionable process of transferring between programs and some familiarity of how transfer application works, but that's a story for in a bit. But the most important thing about this whole journey of uncertainty is that somehow succeeded, and partly it's just due to the fact that one of the most important thing is that even when things don't go according to plan, the most important thing you need to keep track, or most importantly, I found that kept me somewhat together is some of the more important things I learned. I learned especially going through the IB diploma program. As I will, next slide, as I will show some pretty key and important tips, because sometimes when you don't quite exactly have things go according to plan, you may be disappointed, and I understand it's also difficult, but it's actually a pretty good time to try new things because sure, you may not exactly like the fact that the IB diploma requires us to take 6 different subjects that are not always completely related to one another, but as with sometimes with disappointment is that it's always a good opportunity to try new things. And that's what I found most valuable about the whole experience of trying to balance between stuff like CAS and all and academics is that it also means that it can be a start of just trying out new and different hobbies that you have never quite thought about. Because now that when you do arrive in university, you don't really have any natural pressure making you want to forcing you to go do extracurriculars. All your extracurriculars by then are self-defined by you. And as such, it's always a good time to pick up a new hobby or meet up new people in different interests that you weren't sure about or you've never heard about, because you can't be cooped out in either your dorm or your room and study every hour of the day away. You're likely to just burn yourself out. And one of the most important thing I learned through this whole somewhat complicated journey is that it is not the wisest decision to let yourself be consumed by a desire or intent. You will ultimately become burnt out as a consequence. So one of the most important lessons I learned is just learning to maintain some form of balance, because sometimes yes, you get flooded with work, but one of the most important thing is ultimately balance. As weird as it sounds, having some amount and doing some form of leisurely activities is pretty important for your personal well-being, both physical and mental, which also does demonstrate a very important point is that at the end of the day, you can find things that give you joy in all sorts of different places, and that is why even if you don't get what you want, there's always an opportunity to try new things. And it's how I discovered through my really interesting journey through university, interest that I actually never knew I actually had before. But but sometimes even then that may not be enough. And sometimes we do have to talk about what happens if we do become more stubborn and persistent, as I will now describe in the next slide. So persistence is important, but as I mentioned just now, you have to take care of yourself. So if you do want to ask me as somebody who have the 2 years experience in transferring, if you ever are considering doing such a thing when you're in university, which may be premature right now, but if you're actually ever going to consider that in the future, think 3 times. It is time consuming, and you may have to use a lot of skills that you have picked up during this very, very difficult time. Because if you think trying to balance finishing your applications right now in high school is difficult, it becomes even more burdensome as you were trying to fill out in university, which is why, as somebody has experienced the process, I would highly recommend you think many, many times and actually confirm whether that is for you. Because persistence is pretty great. It's pretty good feat, but there's also what happens when you have too much persistence and enter the realm of being too stubborn. It becomes the point where it just becomes very unhelpful, because as we see in this wonderful image I picked here at the bottom right, is that you don't want to be burnt out, because at the end of the day, balance is everything. You may find if you're doing the IB program again, which once again it's a name that which I will consistently repeat, is that it somewhat does show you what the possibility of a way of balancing yourself will look like. And in a way, knowing this sort of vague structure will actually help guide you as you go further in. And sometimes there are some subconscious skill that you may not appreciate learning at first, but eventually you find that it will help subtly influence how you go about your life when you first enter university. Because again, you don't want to let yourself burn out. And as I'm going to repeat with the last line, is that ultimately don't let your university or your program define your entire life. As mentioned previously, is that sometimes you don't get what you want and you may want to be persistent and stubborn, but try to keep a balance and be open for new opportunities. Because the other end of being very persistent and stubborn is that you may find yourself pretty burnt out, and by then you may not quite enjoy the after effects of being burnt out rather early on in your studies, since sure, high school and probably your IB exams are over, but you still got a few more years of studying left, and it's best not to exhaust all your energy at the start. Because I think ultimately one of the most important thing to think about the whole journey of going through university is that it's basically running a marathon. And so if you're taken like once again the IB program, you eventually just learn how a good way of just pacing yourself, since at the end of the day, it's not education and university is not a 100-meter race. It's a marathon. And so if you exhaust all your energy at the start, you will probably find yourself starting to drag yourself as you gradually approach the near the end of your education. Sure, and with that probably ends what I'm about to say, as a huge chunk of this is also to just once again emphasize the fact that remember, if you want to emphasize the fact, if you want to take anything away from this, is that balance is key, and you may realize that a lot of things you're going through now through the IB program, if you're taking it, will ultimately subtly influence you in ways that you'd never think about. And when the moment comes in university, it's like, I actually have learned this before. You realize that, yeah, it's all the thing you're going through now will actually definitely help you in the future. And also be open to new opportunities and don't be too stubborn. Being too stubborn is not the it's not the best idea. And so with the next slide, it will just be a thank you.
I have a question.
Sure,
Sure,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So what's like the social scene in U Toronto like?
With that is that it's really dependent on your self-initiative, because a huge chunk of it really is dependent on what social groups you actually do get involved in. Because one of the most important, because if you're not aware yet, is that University of Toronto is a massive university. So with so many students wandering about, it does require some effort to have an active social life. But then it's also like what you get out of it entirely. The more, I would say, the more proactive you are in terms of social engagement, the better it's likely for you. But as always, is that being with many people, it's also a bit better to join. It's also a bit better to just get involved with extracurriculars like clubs and whatnot, because again, sometimes people in your class may not always be the best group of people to hang around, and you may want a breath of fresh air by getting involved in clubs and just talk to people from many different other programs, since you may actually learn that since these are good opportunities to get involved with people from like different years. Like sometimes you may even get an opportunity to meet an occasional graduate student if you're lucky, since a lot of these clubs are not just limited to people in their first to fourth year in their undergraduate program.
Thank you.
It was a great question, and thank you for such a detailed answer, YuXuan. Does anyone else have a question for us?
Yeah, there is actually a follow-up here on the Zoom chat. How tough is first year in terms of adapting to the atmosphere and being welcome? Well, so from that is that part of it really depends on which program you're in at the university, since there are sort of like different subtle culture here at the University of Toronto. But also because I also got into university as COVID restriction was winding down, so my experience may not be the most representative of it. But from what I heard from a lot of people, a lot of the freshmen below me, is that it's actually pretty active, but also depends on what program you're in, because sometimes you may get unlucky and just be involved in a group of relatively introverted people. But hey, in those moments, it's always a good time to just be proactive and say hi, since sometimes everybody kind of just wants the same thing and actually develop friendships. But again, part of it really depends on which program you're in, since different programs have a different atmosphere to it. But you absolutely will feel welcome if you are a bit more on the proactive side, since people do enjoy talking to other people, and especially if you do get involved in clubs, you realize that a lot of clubs are pretty much open to new people joining, and it's also a good way to always make new friends doing extracurriculars. But in terms of adapting, I say it depends on what your background is. I didn't find it as hard of adapting, other than uh, other than the fact that we are too used to the tropical season in Malaysia. Having 4 seasons will feel a bit different. Oh, sorry, not a bit, a lot different, since hey, you get snow now, and you can get temperatures starting from 16 degrees to down to, I think the lowest temperature for today was actually around -8. So be prepared for that. Least important question. Okay, next question is from my brother in the chat. Least important question. Where's the best Tim Hortons location in Toronto? The best location is the location where your friends are buying food for you, since Since the as the old adage goes, free food is always the best food.
Spoken like a true college student living on a university student's budget. Do we have any other questions about YuXuan's experience or the University of Toronto applying to schools in Canada that anyone is dying to have answered? As is the intention for these talks, it was short and sweet and to the point and a great message to share with students. We are recording this, so the YouTube link will be made available if you want to watch it again or if you want to share it with a friend who's considering the University of Toronto, excuse me. YuXuan, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's pushing 1 a.m. or are you
No, it's actually the other way around. It's
the
actually
other way around?
pushing
Okay.
11 a.m.
Okay.
Daylight savings made it a bit more complicated than it needs to be.
Just in
Because
time to start studying if you're anything like I was in university. I think I was only starting to open my books around 11 p.m. some nights. So thank you so much for your time and calling in today. We really appreciate it. And that's a wrap for this Get Real session. So thank you all so much, YuXuan. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.